Hey guys, it's Camera Review for Fosse Verdon, Episode 6, All I Care About Is Love, and wow, this was quite a tough episode to watch for sure. Out of all the episodes we've gotten in the show, this one was easily the darkest. I mean, we got into some really heavy stuff here, and I can understand, based on the very heavy and just very graphic nature of this episode, if it was a little too much for some people. I can totally get that. But for me, I thought they did a really good job here with, really striking the balance between not justifying Bob Fosse's actions, but getting us to recognize how things that have happened in his past have dictated how he has become in the future. We got a lot more into his past. We got to see a lot more of how Bob Fosse feels today and things like that, or today as in the time of the show. And I thought they did a very good job with that overall, but of course we're just going to get into it. So I think we'll just get right into it, because most of this episode, this is Bob's episode. And you can say, oh, a lot of the show is focused on him, but this really was Bob's episode. And similar to episode 4, it was kind of structured like All That Jazz in a way, where the whole thing is in his perspective. We're kind of seeing things through his eyes. Not the whole thing. We do cut back to Gwen and things like that, which I do want to talk about. But this episode was mainly how Bob, he has made this terrible decision, which we knew was going to crumble for him, that he is going to work on both Lenny with Dustin Hoffman, but he's also going to work on Chicago with Gwen. He's going to work at them at the same time, and we can already see how this has become a huge problem for him. He is stressed out a lot more. He's constantly getting distracted by things, and it gets really bad. You have Chicago rehearsals, and he can't really do much of anything. He's like coughing every 5 seconds, and again, it's because this was a sick man. This was not someone that should have ever come out of that hospital. He should have stayed in that mental hospital, and I do think if Bob Fosse had stayed there, he might not have died when he did, but because he didn't, I mean, you can already see the effect it's having on him, and partially a lot of that is due to Gwen, but again, Gwen understood, like, who he really was and things like that. And we'll talk about Gwen a little bit, because this episode gives us some interesting stuff with her. But of course, the main stuff in this episode is Bob reflecting on his past while working on this project of Lenny. And the editing style of this episode, I thought, was really cool. I like the way that Bob used Lenny as a way to get inside his own head. He takes the narrative form of that film, which I am not familiar with. Like, I actually didn't know at first that this was supposed to be, like, his own version of Lenny. I hadn't seen the film or anything, but I thought it was really cool the way they did this, where we're getting inside his head, and, in that movie, similar to Dustin Hoffman, he is a stand-up comedian to an audience of no one, and he's basically just stating his plight. We get to understand what he's going through, and I thought that was genuinely very well done, because, we haven't really seen this since the first episode. We got glimpses of it in the first episode, but ever since then, we haven't really come back to it, and we do actually get to come back to it here. We see that Bob, he was pushed into doing vaudeville. He had this very strict sort of teacher who just, no matter what happened, he always had to smile, he always had to entertain, and there was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. He constantly was on him, and those scenes were very harrowing to watch for sure, and I thought they did a very good job with just showing that even though this is something that Bob views as, a lifestyle, it's basically been something he was forced into doing. This is never something that Bob, dreamed of doing. I'm sure he dreamed of becoming a performer and things like that, but he was basically dragged into it. And you can understand why art is so important to him now, because of these traumatic memories, because of these days of him being this 13-year-old kid, and him having to be at this, strip club and things like that. I mean, it's a very harsh and just very scary environment for someone of that age to be in, and I thought they did a very good job with handling that for sure. But the big reveal, of course, in this episode is what actually happened to Bob. Why is he constantly haunted by these memories? Well, it turned out that these 3 strippers that were there, one night after he was performing, they went they went backstage and basically seduced him, and basically forcefully, they did rape him. At least it's implied that they did, in fact, rape him. And it's very sad to hear, for sure, and it makes sense why Bob, we cut back and we see, Anne in his hospital room, why he views sex as not something that's special. He doesn't view it as something that's special. He views it as just a pastime. He views it as something that's very casual, and I thought they did a very good job of getting into the mind. Now, again, the episode is not condoning what Bob is doing, and that's something I think people are going to have a misconception with. It is not trying to condone what Bob is doing. More, it is making us understand why Bob views sex in the very casual way that he does. Why is it every single woman that he comes up to, you know, he can't seem to not be sexually aroused by? He can't seem to not want to just instantly, you know, just fuck them right then and there. Why does he have that urge to do that? And we really do get that in this episode, and that's something I very much did enjoy. Even it was very hard to watch for sure, but I really appreciate the fact that the show wasn't trying to dance around this, because it is a very hard subject for sure. And that moment where Anne is basically forced to have sex with Bob, you know, he coaxes her into it because, you know, he's just gotten off of the anesthesia and things like that. He comes back and he tells her, you know, he doesn't feel like he's fully a man. He basically forces her to have sex with him. It's a devastating scene to watch, and in that moment you see Anne kind of realizing just how fucked up all of this is, and just what she's really gotten herself into. That moment at the end after they've had sex where she's coaxed, you know, where she talks to that other guy that's in the hospital, and he asks who she's waiting for, and she says that it's her husband, and you see her start to cry, realizing what she's really gotten herself into, just how harsh of a reality it really is. And again, it stems back to that conversation she had with Gwen. I think Anne knows that, you know, Bob is not someone that is a healthy relationship, but again, similar to what Gwen said, she has to take care of him. She has to be there for him. And she's realizing that what she has with Bob, there's nothing unique about it. There is no real sort of long-term relationship there. And Margaret Qualley's acting, I mean, she's an incredible actress, but that scene in particular, I thought she just acted the hell out of. It's, you know, that wordless scene of her just crying was just fantastic to watch. And I thought it was a really great way to end what is a very harrowing episode for sure. And that's something I really did like getting into here. But going back to what Bob talks about when he has that conversation with himself, you know, when he's a comedian and when he is pretending to be in Lenny and things like that, he brings up a very interesting idea where it's like, what is the difference between sex and applause? With applause, it's only with someone that loves you. He does not view sex as a loving sort of thing. He does not view it as something that is an act between two people that genuinely care about each other. No, he views it as something that's very casual, as something that's almost a hobby to him. And again, it's because of how he grew up. It's because of everything that happened at 13. That's made him very confused and almost, you know, almost like he can't live without it in that way. And you really do see that here. Whereas applause, that's something that he only gets from people that genuinely do care about him. You know, no one's going to give applause to someone if they don't think they're good. And I thought that was a very interesting subject for sure. And I really did like getting into all that stuff. But I also want to talk about Gwen in this episode, because Gwen, she still did have quite a lot to do, even though this was Bob's episode. And like I said, we really did get into his past and things like that. This was still very much, you know, there was still quite a lot here for Gwen to do. First of all, I really like her relationship with Jake Lacy. I like how he's a lot more supportive to her. I like how he is much more in favor of what she's doing. It's something that Gwen, I don't think, is used to. I don't think she's used to this sort of positive type attitude. I mean, they do seem to have a pretty good relationship, and even at that, Jake Lacy, I mean, he does not like Bob. He doesn't want anything to do with Bob. He says that Gwen should just, you know, get a new director and things like that, and Gwen is not okay with that. You know, she wanted this to be her and Bob, and what I like about this is that they're not portraying Gwen as this saint. They are very much showing that, like, Gwen is a very good reason as to why Bob ended up the way he did. If she had not pushed him as hard as she did, I don't think Bob would have ended up in this terrible state. He could have just worked on Lenny, and that would be it. But Gwen was so eager to find work, and she was so eager to work with him again, and she was so adamant about the two of them, you know, having to work together, that he just couldn't say no. And I like that they did. They're not villainizing her in any way, but they're also not trying to show that, like, yeah, Gwen did contribute to some of the downfall of Fosse as well, and you do very much see that here, and I really did like that, for sure. I like that they were able to show that. I mean, especially when she's in Chicago and she's trying to instruct all of them, and, you know, there's never a doubt in her mind that this isn't going to go well, and I really did think that was very well done. But the scene that really struck me in this episode, well, there's two in particular with Gwen, because there was a lot of good stuff there. Michelle Williams, as always, is fantastic. I think she does such an incredible job in this role, and it's definitely something I'm gonna miss once the show is over, for sure. I think she's just done such an incredible job. But the scene that really did get me is when she goes to Bob and they have that conversation. The things that he says to her are very interesting. He brings up how he does not want anyone else to see him this way. Not even Anne. He doesn't want Anne to see him this way because he views Gwen as his wife. Even though he's with Anne and they're in a relationship, he views Gwen as his wife. He views Gwen as one of the only people he genuinely trusts in his life, which I thought was interesting for sure. And I like that moment where they're talking about damn Yankees and how he wanted to cut that specific number of musical chairs. He has that realization that the number wasn't even very good, and then they got Who's Got the Pain, and that's how they've kind of been in, they've kind of been, you know, they've owed this debt to each other ever since then. They've always been sort of tethered since then. You can't have Gwen Verdon without Bob Fosse, and it very much does seem that way. They're kind of that dynamic duo in a way, and I like that moment where Bob is kind of realizing that, and it's sad, too, though, because at the same time, Bob never gave Gwen that credit that I think she really did deserve, and that's one of the reasons why, again, Gwen Verdon is just not well recognized today. That's why not a lot of people know who Gwen Verdon is beyond, like, Chicago and Sweet Charity, when, as we're seeing in the show, in reality, she contributed to a lot, and, you know, when he's falling on hard times, Gwen is the person he goes to talk to. When he's really struggling with something, Gwen is the person he goes to talk to. No, the relation between them is not good, but considering what happened to Bob, I don't think any of his relationships will ever be good. The only relationship that's good is that of Nicole, and it makes sense why he's not in Nicole's life very much. He doesn't want to tarnish that relationship. At least this is how I see it. I think the reason why Bob wasn't very involved is because he didn't want to ruin their relationship. He already knew that there were so many relationships he was just destroying. Obviously, with Patty, things were okay, because those two seem to be good friends, but even at that, Patty is very much aware of, you know, the stuff that Bob does and how he doesn't want to take care of himself and things like that. We even saw that in the last episode. But as far as things go with Nicole, those two don't really have that much of a relationship. And the moment where Nicole is basically forced to go to the hospital, even though she doesn't want to be there, you realize she's starting to feel a lot more cynical towards Bob. And it's understandable. He wasn't there during her childhood very much. And I gotta admit, when they first showed Nicole, I was very caught off guard. I was not expecting the time jump that they did. I knew they were going to do a time jump eventually, but I did not think it was going to be this early on. Like, we go from little girl Nicole, and now all of a sudden she's like this other actress who I thought was good. Like, I don't have anything against Juliet Brett. From what she did, I thought she did a good job, but I was just a little thrown off by her in this role. Once they got more into it, then I started to get a little bit more used to it. I thought the moment where, like I said, she goes up to Bob and, you know, basically is forced to, you know, she's forced to tell him how much she cares about him and things like that, and then she has that great moment with Gwen, and this was the other moment with Gwen that I thought was really great, and Michelle Williams did a great job with. Nicole asked her this question of, like, does it ever bother you? Does it bother you that he's always with Anne? Does it bother you that those two are together when him and Gwen are supposed to be together? And Gwen rationalized it as, well, they just don't have what we have. And in a way, I think that's true, because again, we saw that Bob didn't really want anyone else to see him in this terrible state, but he was okay with Gwen seeing him that way. But also, I think it's her kind of rationalizing things that aren't necessarily true at all. I think a lot of what she's saying is kind of bullshit. I think a lot of what she's saying is just her telling herself that because she doesn't want to believe that, you know, I mean, I think Gwen knows, obviously, like, he has this condition and things like that, and that he's not very faithful, but I think she's also always felt like they've had this bond together, and Nicole's starting to realize that, like, no, there really is nothing that different between the two of you, is a really good moment, because sure, I mean, again, creatively, yes, but romantically, no. There's nothing different about their relationship than it is about Anne and Bob's relationship. We definitely see that, especially in that scene in the hospital room. For sure, we get to see that, and it's a very devastating scene for sure. I think Gwen, honestly, if she hadn't have been with Bob, I think things could have turned out a lot better for her. I really do. I think she maybe would have gotten more recognition. I think maybe she would have gotten the opportunity to have more roles, but Bob was always stifling her. I mean, going all the way back to that conversation that they had when she was working on that play that bombed horribly. I mean, he told her straight up, like, no, you cannot play a mother who has a son because you don't have experience with that kind of thing. And I feel like if she had someone like, say, Jake Lacy since then, things might have turned out a lot better for her, but unfortunately that's not the case, and that was just very sad to see for sure. Now, in terms of flaws with this episode, I don't really have a ton, but I will say I do think that as much as I enjoyed these flashbacks, I would have wanted to see a little bit more of them. I would have wanted to see them maybe peppered throughout the season. It's kind of the same of how I felt with Gwen's stuff in episode 3, as much as I enjoyed that. I would have liked to see it throughout the season as opposed to just this one episode, because what we get is very hazy. Now, I did read that it's very possible that the reason why things were so sort of hazy and not very, it's not structured all that well, was mainly because Bob probably had repressed a lot of those memories and he didn't really think a lot about, which is understandable. And when you go through something that traumatic, it really does alter your sense of state, and we saw that for Bob for sure. So it's very possible that they just don't know a lot of what he went through. They have ideas of what he went through, but we don't know, like, how often this was going on. We don't really know, like, what happened to Bob after that. I mean, it's very possible that they did that, but I do think that they could have maybe shown a little bit more there for sure. Also, like I said, the time jump I think could have been handled a little bit better. It was a little unclear where we were at first, but once we saw the older Nicole, it's like, oh, it's only been a few years, but they were acting like it was like a whole huge time jump, when in reality it really wasn't that big of a time jump. I don't really know why they had to replace the actress, at the moment. I'm not entirely sure why, but I did think that they did a good job with it eventually, but for a while I thought it was a little messy there. Also, as much as I did appreciate them doing what they did with Bob, Chicago did not really play a major role in here at all, and I do hope, I'm not sure if they're going to, but I hope in a future episode we get to see more of Chita Rivera. Bianca Ameriquin, similar to Kelly Barrett, she has this, she has this actress down so well. She totally knows, she totally embodies the character that she is playing, and I think she did a very good job with that for sure. Obviously, Rivera is not as distinctive in vocal tone as, say, Minnelli was, but I still thought she did a very good job here. I really do want to see, though, kind of what Chita Rivera was up to. Because think about this. I mean, 1 second, she's in this production, and then immediately it's halted because Bob is now having this heart attack. So I'd like to see maybe what Chita Rivera was up to since then. I think that would have been kind of cool to, like, see. Because think about it, like, if you went to a casting director who's told him, oh, no, I can't do that, I'm in another show, then all of a sudden you're not in that show, so what do? Do you take that offer, or do you just wait? I mean, I don't want to see, like, a huge thing of it, but just a brief mention would be very interesting to see. I think that's a very interesting sort of thing they could do for sure. Moving forward, I think the next few episodes are going to be really about Bob's downfall, but also Gwen's rise to stardom again with Chicago, which I think they're going to do very well. I hope we get to see some of all that jazz, just because of how much I adore that production, but also because, and we've seen it throughout the show, that was easily Bob's most personal work. I mean, there was never any work that he did that was more personal to him than all that jazz, and if we at least don't get a glimpse of it, which I'm sure we will. I mean, Anne Reinking is a main character on the show, and she was a huge role in that movie as well, so I have a feeling that we will see something of that. I hope it's just not a brief thing, though. I want to see quite a lot of all that jazz, and I'm excited to see the way things do play out there, but we do have 2 episodes left. I'm excited to see where they do go with those 2 episodes for sure, but overall, like I said, I definitely did like this episode a lot. It was definitely a very hard one to watch for sure, but I think it provided provided the necessary elements we needed for Bob. Now we understand more of where he's coming from. Again, they're not rationalizing, they're not justifying what he's doing, they're not condoning what he's doing. It's not that. That's not at all what this episode was supposed to be. It was more of reflecting on the type of person Bob Fosse was, who he was in his childhood, and how that has dictated the things he did in the present time, you know, back then. I thought they did a very good job with that for sure. And a lot of Bob's previous actions, they make a lot more sense now. The way he views sex, for example, again, being very casual, not really being something that is celebratory or something that is, you know, an act between loved ones. No, he just views it as a casual thing. That's why every single woman he comes upon, you know, most times he ends up sleeping with. He doesn't say no to them, and we definitely do get to see that here. We got a lot bigger of an understanding between him and Anne. I mean, Anne is just another girl for him. She's not really much else than that, and we do get to see that. But we also do see how this has affected Bob very negatively, just how, again, just how terrible of a person he really has become, how he manipulates people, how he basically forced Anne into sex, basically. I mean, I don't know if you could consider it rape, but it basically was, and I thought they definitely did a good job with that scene for sure. Like I said, a lot of hard stuff here, but Sam Rockwell, Michelle Williams, and Margaret Qualley, they just acted the hell out of this episode. I loved what we got to see with them. Also, where was Patty? I didn't see Patty throughout this entire episode, which was a little strange considering that he is Bob's closest ally. I don't know if we're done with him as a character. I'm not entirely sure. We'll have to see what happens as the show goes on. But either way, this was another really stellar episode, and I'm definitely going to give Fosse Verdon episode 6, All I Care About Is Love, overall in A-. So over, guys, in my review of this episode of Fosse Verdon, let me know what you guys saw this episode overall. Lift your thoughts, and I have one more episode to watch, and then I will be caught up on the show. But that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.